Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and like August, I wish to thank Hank Zumach, who I've met now for the first time, and who hatched the idea to have this soiree. And I'd like to also thank the folks at the Crosse area Freethought Society for also chipping in for all the work that's gone into making this happen. Dr. Chivalis for moderating the debate and for providing a wonderful host, he and his family, for my wife and I. And of course to my good friend August for agreeing to debate me again. My goal here, following August's talk, is really twofold. One, it's to show that arguments against God don't really hold up. Secondly, it's to show that while there is no such thing as irrefragable or indisputable scientific proof that God exists, there are good reasons to place your belief in God, to place your moral, intellectual, and spiritual stock in the presence of a living God. August, for all the years I've known him and debated him, that was the most intense laundry list of things that I think I've ever heard brought up. That, August, was like drinking from a fire hose. August raised a whole number of questions. He said he was going to raise 6 questions. I think I counted more like 15 or 6 what?
Main questions.
6 main questions. Well, okay, there were 6 questions with parts A, B, and C. I'm not going to get us anywhere tonight if we start going down this laundry list of things. So I'm going to press on. I didn't hear a case for atheism tonight. I heard some complaints, I heard some conundrums, some interesting philosophical conundrums, and I love philosophical conundrums, but I didn't hear an actual argument for atheism. Now, I leave it to you, the listening audience, and by the way, I forgot most of all to thank you guys for showing up tonight. It's a rainy night, you could be out doing just about anything, watching something on Hulu or something like that. I'm delighted to see a full room to see that there's an interest in this debate. The best atheists in history have affirmed that there is no more important a question than whether or not a God exists. Questions, folks, don't get more important than this type of question tonight. So I'm extremely happy that you're here, especially because I'm 38 years old. I know I look a little younger than that, which I'm happy about. When many of you are undergraduates, I'm sure. I just back then I would never come to these things, and I'm delighted that you do. All right, I'm just eating up my time here. Like many of you, I grew up in a traditional church, and probably like many of you, I didn't like it. I found it to be an intrusion on sleep. Essentially, for the most part, going to church seemed to me just to be an irritation, and frankly, an outmoded piece of punishment, some sort of unnecessary pastime that people designed to wage war on much-needed sleep on the weekends. But there's a strange twist there. As much as I disliked going to church on Sunday with my parents and really just didn't care for it, and I was made an altar boy too, and I just really didn't want to do that. I grew up in New York and was hanging out with my friends. We'd go down to the ocean, we'd hang out, talk about things, get a little wild, sometimes, have some deep conversation or whatever. I did not have the religious convictions I have. I'm a Christian, a committed Christian. I was not then. I didn't care for Christianity. And yet, there's a point of continuity between my teen years and my early 20s back then and now. A conviction that I maintain with equal force today as I did then. frankly, that it's intuitively obvious that there's a God. As Oxford philosopher Keith Ward has put it, to the majority of those who have reflected deeply and written about the origin and nature of the universe, it has seemed that it points beyond itself to a source which is non-physical and of great intelligence and power. Almost all of the greatest classical philosophers, certainly Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, Kant, Hegel, Locke, Berkeley, saw the origin of the universe as lying in a transcendent reality. They had different specific ideas of this reality, of course, and different ways of approaching it, but that the universe is not simply self-explanatory, and that it requires some explanation beyond itself, was something that they all accepted as fairly obvious. I might add to that list Johann Fichte, who once wrote that it is a mistake to say that it is doubtful whether or not there is a God. It is not in the least doubtful, but the most certain thing in the world, nay, the foundation of all other certainty, the only solid absolute objectivity that there is a moral government of the world. To quote another Oxford Don, I studied in England, so I have a tendency to like to quote these Oxford guys. Of course, if I did it in an English accent, they'd sound better, but you know, most of these fellows who, my doctoral supervisor studied at Oxford and Cambridge, and the guy could read a grocery list, and it sounds fantastic. So we lose something in translation. But Dr. John Lennox is professor, as they say in the UK, professor of maths at Oxford, and also a fellow in the philosophy of science. He has said this: the evidence for God's existence does not start with pure reason operating in a vacuum. It starts intuitively by recognizing the signs for God's existence to which human reason can then respond. This manifest knowledge of God starts with the physical universe. The Christian apostle Paul wrote, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made." It is plain. It is a plain inference. The French theologian Etienne Born has said, "The world, or rather the world with man in it, is a sufficient witness to an absolute, inaccessible in its essence, indubitable in its existence." God, ladies and gentlemen, has not left us without lights, beacons along the way to come and know something about Him. Comprehensive knowledge of God, no, but some apprehension of God and His transcendent nature, yes. He has condescended to express His existence in the created universe and in our moral conscience. To quote the infamous phrase by the moral philosopher and epistemologist Immanuel Kant, how do we know God exists? The starry hosts above and the moral law within. We can perceive directly and intuitionally, and not by some long means of some protracted, highly complex set of syllogisms, that He exists. Though later on, if you care to do that, simply ask me, and I will present you with some protracted syllogisms, philosophical arguments that God does exist. But of course, I understand this is a debate. I cannot just stand up here and say, well, folks, God is obvious, have a good night, drive home safely, I win. As informal as we are being tonight, it is a formal debate, and I realize we need to engage our God-given minds, and we need to follow some reasoning process, which is vital in our subsequent understanding. The complaint that most atheists have is that there's no good evidence for God's existence. We heard this from August. The famous British atheist Bertrand Russell was once asked what he would say if he died and faced God, who asked him, "Why didn't you believe in me?" Russell replied, said that he would reply to God that there simply was not enough evidence. Some atheists, August included, believe that they don't bear the same burden for adducing evidences or reasons for their beliefs. They say that they just assume atheism is the default position. The reality, though, is that atheism is not a zero-sum belief system, nor etymologically, neither etymologically nor in common parlance is atheism defined, as August defines it, as simply lacking belief. Atheism is a philosophical worldview, which along with it has a whole set of positive entailments. Physical naturalism, for example. All that exists is space, time, and matter and energy, and the interchangeability of matter and energy. That is an unprovable philosophical worldview. That is a positive entailment. That is not simply lacking a belief in something. That is affirming a view of the universe, which he has not demonstrated. Philosophical naturalism is the axiomatic corollary of atheism, which leads atheists to hold a whole range of definite, non-provable views of the universe. In fact, so huge is this claim to an unbridled naturalism that one of the greatest living philosophers today, the Notre Dame philosopher Alvin Plantinga, has called this presumption, this simple presumption of atheism, that it's just somehow the default position, quote, a piece of merely arbitrary intellectual imperialism. Many atheists issue the riposte that they actually don't need to provide solid reasons for their position because the burden of proof falls on the positive claimant. That is, the person making a positive affirmation of something as opposed to a negation. But as I've said, they are forgetting that their own position is a position that has positive entailments. It's not simply a negation. More could be said about that, but I'll leave that there for now. Now, even if it were a negation, it is simply logically false to say that someone's negating something automatically gains for them greater epistemic warrant, meaning a greater reason to believe. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, how we know what we know and how we come to know what we know and why we know it, and how we continue to come to know what we know and how we know it, etc. That's my technical definition of epistemology. So he negates God. Negate, or gods, as he likes to say, and I think that that's a fine piece of rhetorical flourish. We're debating the existence of whether or not a god, as commonly understood, exists or not. We're not having a debate about whether Wotan or Poseidon or Ares or, I should mention Odin, the divine overseer, leader of Valhalla. Perhaps a moment of silence for Odin for providing us with this magnificent theater of divinity. Valhalla. Something about that word. It's just kind of funny. I don't know. At any rate, to say that simply negating something would gain a person greater epistemic warrant would mean that any claim, any denial of something would automatically gain greater currency, just merely ex hypothesi. I could make the claim death does not exist, or heliocentrism is not true, or there's no more gold in Alaska, and somehow that would be the default position. You're supposed to default to me unless evidence can be provided on the other side. And that is simply a false, that is simply a breaking of about 2 plus A and B cardinal rules of logic. Again, more can be said, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Principally, what August does is he appeals to the so-called God of the Gaps argument, what I, ladies and gentlemen, will call to you tonight the God of the Gaps fallacy.